Maximum security. Number of inmates in supermax prisons in U.S. is unknown. Gresham Sykes states that the maximum security prison represents a social system in which an attempt is made to create and maintain total or almost total social control. Conditions in maximum security prison. Rules and regulations designed both for custody purposes and maintaining order. Conditions in maximum security prisons have dramatically changed since Sykes conducted his research in 1958. Supermax prisons have 100 beds and is designed to incarcerate the worst of the worst. Level 1 is the lowest prison level. Inmates are unable to regulate cell temperature. There is no air conditioning, like windows that inhibit air circulation. Showers, although provided, are only allowed 3 times a week. Inmates are allowed 4 hours of exercise a week in an exercise cell, larger cell with no windows nor exercise equipment. Exercise permitted at discretion of prison officers. Small law libraries set up in a cell. Inmates who use them must be shackled and cuffed with their cuffs attached to a belly chain. While in prison, inmates are not allowed to face-to-face visit except with their lawyers and rely on video visitation. Inmates will see their visitors on small window screens with poor audio quality. Level 1 inmates are permitted 6-minute telephone calls each month. They are not allowed library books in their cells but can have a Bible. Confinement in supermax security prison is unknown to cause severe psychiatric morbidity, disability, suffering, and mortality. High number of prisoners are not able to maintain sanity and attempt suicide. Prisoners who are obsessed with suicidal thinking smear feces, swallow metal objects, and cut their flesh and attempt to hang themselves. Since prisoners can't see other inmates, they tend to self-harm and use that as an outlet to express anger and aggression. Inmates are confined to windowless cells for 22.5 hours a day. Inmates' doors of their cells contain slots for food trays and meal delivery, and it's the only time officers approach cells. The next is mortality of supermax confinement. Hoskins states, fails to respect offenders as moral persons who as such are always capable of moral reform. Max prisons are morally wrong because it constitutes a denial of a person's dignity. Solitary confinement denies inmates the opportunity to retain traits like kindness, honesty, and courage. Isolation causes severe psychological damage, rendering inmates permanently capable of moral development. The next is maximum security in the United Kingdom. Maximum facilities were established in the 1960s. In England, the prison conditions in maximum security prisons allow prisoners to interact, be employed in a range of educational vocational programs, thinking that long-term was itself a harmful punishment. 8 max security prisons in England in total. Prisoners in max security are classed as Category A. The next is growth of supermax prisons. What explains the growth of supermax prisons in the United States? Prisons in solitary confinement exist as management tools to manage prisoners labeled as disruptive. The next is evaluating the success of the supermax prison. In California, no reduction in prison violence by removing inmate troublemakers. In Arizona, Illinois, and Minnesota, also no reduction. A receive in 2019 concluded that solitary confinement has little to no effect on behavioral customs. The next is, has the supermax prison contributed to resolving the problem of prison gangs? Gangs would regroup and find new leaders. Solitary confinement. What constitutes solitary confinement? Restrictive housing equals solitary confinement. Solitary confinement can be traced back to Cherry Hill Prison in Philadelphia, 1823. By 1830s, saw a sharp increase in mental disorders among inmates, included but not limited to hallucinations and dementia. 3 main forms of segregation: punitive segregation, protective segregation, and administrative segregation. The next is, are there any legal restrictions concerning the punishment of solitary confinement? The 8th Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Solitary confinement has been challenged as a violation of the prohibition in the courts. In 1890, the U.S. Supreme Court in Re Medley rejected prison administrative claims that prisoners were kept in close confinement and not solitary confinement. Solitary confinement does not reform inmates and causes serious mental health problems. The physical conditions are found to be a deprivation of hot water, soap, and clothing. Most heavily impacted are young black inmates. Average stay was 21 days, expanded to 42 days in solitary confinement for black inmates. Racial disparities occurred since black inmates served a period 2 weeks longer than whites. The next is maximum security and minimum security. Approximately 1/3 inmates are incarcerated in medium security prisons. Medium security prisons secure inmates with double fences and topped with barbed wire. The medium security prisons were built since 1925 have high level of supervision and guarding. Minimum security prisons hold only about 10% of prisoners. Constructed after 1950, the emphasis in minimum security prisons are vocational training and treatment, typically non-violent first-time offenders and white-collar criminals. Normal lifestyle gates are open and inmates have a degree of privacy. Have family visiting facilities where prisoners are able to stay with their families for up to 3 days at a time. Stateville Prison, the changing state of corrections. Jacobs showed how patterns of prison authority changed over time. Activism of the 1960s legislated concerns with civil rights, the poor, and criminal defendant. Early prison governance at Stateville. Stateville opened in 1925, free from any outside oversight when it just opened. Early wardens were political appointees. In 1930s, prison officers worked up to 16 hours a day. They were untrained, underpaid, and physically unfit. Stringing up is when an inmate stands handcuffed to the bars of the cell for 8 hours a day for up to 15 days. Stateville and Prison Order, 1936 to 1961, was ruled by Warden Joe Reagan, who wanted to make Stateville the world's most orderly prison, exercise control, and establish authoritarian regime. He ignored physical assaults on inmates. Reagan felt benefits were considered privileges. Stateville and prisoners' rights, 1960s. Prison was linked to racism and repression. Judicial activism and social activists, especially minorities, were provided with a political rhetoric and ideology that radicalized prisons. Stateville and professionalism, 1970 through 1975. More legislative leadership between prison officers and prisoners. What does the history of Stateville Prison tell us about ethics and ethical norms in the prison environment? Radicalized prisoners practice social activism, political rhetoric, and ideology. Correction subculture. Inmate subculture exists in prisons and first proposed by Donald Clemmer in 1940. Prison officer socialization. Prison officer recruits are socialized to prison and subculture during their training. Prison officer occupation appealed to unemployed or from communities. More than half of the 40 recruits in Kaufman's study gave financial considerations as only a primary reason for becoming police officers. 20% joined power and authority and was a reason to become police officers. Stereotypical prison guard was a frustrated cop. Frustrated cop focused on family tradition and wished to achieve status in the community. Several groups were the sons or relatives of police or prison officers. Adapting to prison. Recruits who did not fit officers' ideal were expelled or responded by anger and resentment. Recruits who didn't adapt to prison values were ostracized, harassed, or received expulsion. Prison cultures were obliged to accommodate differing values. Prison officer subcultures crucial to the process of socializing inmates were informally assumed by officers as hyper-violent, hypersexual, and dangerously masculine regardless of race. Assumptions were categorized as being common sense knowledge about criminals. Prison officer subculture disregarded inmates' qualities that did not accord with officers' assumptions about them.